and welcoming.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming out on this rainy Tuesday. So as mentioned, my name is Safiah. I'm a policy development officer here at the city. I work on poverty reduction, and this presentation is about the first ever project I worked on as a city staffer, which was a year and a half ago. So I haven't been here for that long, and I hopefully won't say anything that will cut that even shorter. So I'm relatively new to both the city and, of course, to the civic tech space. And so this presentation that I'm going to give, oh, and I forgot the clicker, one second. Yeah, so this presentation is going to be about the process that we undertook to modernize our service delivery, and less about the actual outcomes, but I think the process is really interesting, especially to give insight as to what it really takes for a government ship to be able to pivot and move, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So the question is that I'm hoping to be able to address is how do you take a user-centered design process within government to improve outcomes for the public? And so this is the story of one of those experiments. Oh. Yes. Oh, it's off. There we go. Okay. So of course, some context. So Ontario Works is the social assistance program in the province, and it's governed by the province of Ontario. They kind of set the legislation and the rules around that. Toronto Employment and Social Services, or TESS, which is acronyms you'll be hearing a lot, OW TESS, administers the provincial OW program in Toronto. So there's about 80,000 to 100,000 residents, Toronto residents on Ontario Works. And it fluctuates depending on the month. And we have over 800 employer partners that we work with, and there's over 2,000 TESS staff that work across 19 offices, 15 of which are dedicated solely to administering OW and employment center. And so approximately, I counted, this is my hasty count, approximately 11 different people may touch one OW file depending on their role. So, I mean, it's a really large system. It's massive. It's, I think, one of the largest operational, if not the largest operational division that's not an agency at the cities. I think only like transportation and water are bigger than TESS. So hopefully we'll be able to give some more insight about this. And I was really glad for the introductions because now I know kind of who the public servants are in the room, and the Ministry of MCSS is here, so you know they govern a lot of the work that we do. And if at any point you find it difficult to follow the acronyms and the process, feel free to interrupt me at any time. So, yeah, or ask the province. Yeah. Oh, I went backwards. Okay. So what we did. So at a very high level, what we did is we went from a 2 to 12 week process to a 48-hour process. We went from having no e-strategy or e-channel options to having multiple e-options. We went from a one-size-fits-all service delivery model, so irrespective of your background or how you're applying, it was kind of the standardized process, the standardized service, to one that was differentiated. And this all occurred through user-centered design and collaboration. So, innovating in a legislative program. So basically we have this very, very large system, only some of which we have control over. So for example, we know the best way to improve outcomes for people on social assistance is to increase rates. However, as a municipal service provider, we can't actually do that. So we are and we're also mandated to use a lot of provincial technological systems. So we actually don't own a lot of our data, a lot of the data either. We have our own data capture systems, but because they're for specific purposes, the data doesn't always talk to one another, and it doesn't actually give us the wholesome picture of actually our caseload. So our scope of impact, the scope of impact for TESS is the experience people have when they're coming onto OW and when they're on social assistance. And so that's where we were thinking, that's where we need to intervene. But because we serve such a vulnerable population base, some of the most vulnerable people in the city, there's a hypervigilance in the way that we do our work. As with any government program, you all probably know better than I do, there's a lot of rules and regulations that govern our work and govern our processes. And so as you know, the bureaucracy as a result is not always, actually it's very infrequently easy to navigate. So this is our existing system, circa April 2015. So what do you notice about this? Sorry? Yeah, there's a lot of steps. It's quite linear. Everything is weighted equally. Each step is weighted equally. They kind of exist as independent steps that don't really speak to one another. It's quite boxy. And so how do we respond to the public's demand for new service channels? As residents, as civic techies, if people identify as civic techies, you really know how antiquated many of the cities or government channels generally are. When I started at the city, I was really surprised that we still rely on faxing. And I don't mean we rely on faxing, it's actually a core tenet of our business to have faxing. So it's because we default to what we know, to what's been deemed safe. And given the context that we work in and the people that we serve, the risk appetite, of course, is not high at all. So because of that, there's often a duplication of work, there's a lot of administration, and there's generally very paper-based. And so this is because these are systems and these are processes that we're very familiar with. So in responding to the new channels and kind of the 21st century, TESS, Employment and Social Services, knew that we had to modernize. It needed to happen. Enter the Service Delivery Model Renewal project. So this project, SDM, I will call it, looks to improve how service is delivered through streamlining, through simplifying, through establishing consistency, and modernizing our services overall. It's a multi-year project, and the first phase was focused on access specifically. So there were 17 recommendations, and we were really looking in this process to test 3 of them. How do we reduce handoffs? How can we introduce third-party checks? And how can we reimagine staff roles? There were, however, a lot more outcomes than that. So pivoting in a large organization. So this is us. And we are saddled with tremendous baggage that date back to probably before I was alive. And the path forward has been deemed safe and familiar. So how can we actually innovate? How can we pivot in a rigid system? How do we get the ship to turn meaningfully? And over time, municipalities have been given more and more control of a lot of the systems, but there has been a lag in acknowledging this changed reality. Only recently, really, has the city felt empowered to make improvements to a system that we previously felt was controlled by the province. So increasingly, we're recognizing that there's space and place that we have to make improvements and to leverage these opportunities for creativity. But we have yet to actually really acknowledge the many complexities and barriers under which we have historically worked. So change management, in order to sift through all the baggage, it needs a great recognition that change is very, very difficult when you're working with 2,000 plus staff and have a budget of $1 billion and are serving residents that are really have a lot of needs and a lot of complex needs. So we thought, how do we do this? Well, why don't we ask the people to use our system? Straightforward, right? For everyone else. So we decided to take a user-centered approach. We thought, well, it makes so much more sense for the people that use our system daily to tell us how to make those improvements. We've all had experiences where something was designed with a process in mind as opposed to the experience or as opposed to usability, and we didn't want to really replicate that. So we thought, we know what we want to do. We want to reduce the handoffs. We want to have a more coordinated staff roles, and we want to have a healthier understanding of risk. A dedicated team of staff at one office could design this, but why not give frontline staff and clients, Ontario Works recipients, the opportunity to innovate, to prototype, and to lead this change? So we put the service users in the driver's seat, but in order for that to happen, the feedback needed to go somewhere. We really do work in a hierarchy, and so flipping kind of the hierarchy on its head, we got management to lead from behind. And so senior management buy-in is so critical to this. They were the ones that gave permission for this to occur, to allow staff to make the decisions. They gave essentially the permission to innovate. Management leading from behind is actually bold and brave and different for them. The key ingredients, of course, for everyone in this room, this is, I imagine, a no-brainer. Working in gray space, seeking forgiveness over permission is a base assumption for how a lot of these spaces work, and probably a lot of the way in which a lot of solutions are made. But imagine for government to say, fail safe, just trust the process. It's new for public service. We really rely on business cases, on meetings, on terms of references, on clearly delineated roles and processes, and that informs a lot of our accountability structures. So how do you foster such an environment? we thought, how can we get frontline staff to actually believe that this process is different and that they're actually going to be informing change? It's not just a collection of nice ideas, but it'll actually be implemented. So it requires obviously trusting them and getting them to trust the system. With any hierarchy, we know that people self-censor when their boss is in the room, when they feel like that they'll be accountable for their words. So what we did is we created spaces where it was only staff. It was only frontline staff that were in that room, and I was the facilitator, where they could share ideas. And the idea was, share anything, any way that you think that the process could be improved. We need to hear those. And so an office management here took a really brave step by stepping back and allowing staff to come up, to be the ones that came up with the ideas and share those things openly. And then that allowed us to create the conditions for a fail-safe environment. So we had 4 offices that I worked with in 4 quadrants of the city, north, east, southwest, with our application center. So our application center is a call-in center, so you can apply for Ontario Works over the phone, and it all gets streamed to the AC, the application center, and our family support unit. So previously, if you apply for social assistance and you have there's an absent parent, the child support money would be reduced from the entitlement, and so we had a unit that kind of worked on all of that. So we took staff, a cross section of staff. So we had employment center staff, we had support assistants, we had caseworkers, we had family support workers, we had application center staff, all sitting together in the room. It was really important to get that cross section of people who touch a file to be in the room. And honestly, surprisingly, it was the first time any of them had actually been together in this space. And so inadvertently, there were tremendous learnings by them simply just hearing from each other and learning about the processes. So even though they had worked together for however many years, they never actually engaged with one another as collaborative problem solvers. And we would meet once a week, sometimes twice a week for an entire morning or afternoon, which is a huge, huge time commitment for these people. They have case loads of something from 80 to 110 people, so to be able to give up that amount of time was quite a sacrifice for them. And these groups, the prototype groups, as I called them, they would tackle everyday opportunities to improve our system. So these are staff who use the system every day and knew very well what didn't work and the ways in which it could be improved. And a lot of times it was getting them to think about critiques as potential solutions. So you've identified a problem, how can we then reframe that as to systemic impact? And another interesting side note is that some of the groups were comprised of volunteers, and some of the groups were comprised of voluntold, which had actually quite a level of difference of engagement. But that's an aside. We also had a prototype steering committee, which was comprised of management staff. So it was management from literally every part of the division. So tax, employment, social services, because it's such a huge division. It has its own IT unit, for example. It has its own HR that's separate from kind of the city's one. And so we convened weekly to discuss ideas and to share updates. This helped tremendously with management buy-in and also kept them in the loop. It also allowed a lot of cross-managerial collaboration to occur in order to push forward common goals. So the body was essential to ensuring everybody was on the same page and acted as a frequent go-to resource to problem solve. This group was responsible for taking the ideas of the prototype group and thinking about how can it have systemic impact. Whoops. Okay. Where am I? Oh, here we go. So thinking about systemic impact. So whereas the group would identify, hey, it's really annoying that I can't do this for my client, I would take that to the managerial group and they would say, okay, if we change this thing about it, then everyone will be able to do that thing for their client, So it had a larger scale impact. So we were troubleshooting on the regular. So encouraging out-of-the-box thinking. Okay. So this is the big challenge. So we exist in a rules-based system. It's difficult for staff, for frontline staff, to trust a process when they're being asked to think outside the rules. So imagine being told for, 7 years that these are the rules, and these rules exist for these reasons, and it's really important that you follow these rules and this process. And suddenly, someone comes in and says, hey, pretend rules don't exist, and try to think out of the box. it was really challenging for a lot of them. One of the things that I heard very frequently was, I've been working at the city, I've been working in this position for 15 years. This is the first time anyone's asked me this question, what's different now? So there was a lot of onboarding that was necessary, tremendous amounts. And I used, in order to do a lot of this onboarding, I tried to use a lot of typical design thinking, user design tools, but I found them actually to be very limited for their applicability in this context. It was a context unlike I had ever experienced, where people were not really primed. One small story is we asked people to do rapid ideating. Think of any idea in 30 seconds, good, bad, maybes, and then categorize them according to those categories, according to those, is it feasible, is it not feasible, is it maybe feasible? And of course, everybody in the room only came up with feasible ideas. And that's because immediately the thinking is to go to implementability. So there's no value in expressing an idea that won't ever see the light of day because it makes someone feel silly or that is a waste of time. So I would create I tried to create a whole new slate of tools and resources specifically for this audience, but for an audience that really had never been asked to think in this way before. Okay, this slide is where I want, yeah. So facilitating trust. So I needed to facilitate and create a lot of quick wins in order for them to trust the process. There was a lot of skepticism throughout the process. So a lot of it was operationalizing ideas. So when it came to an idea, my approach was twofold. The only reason that an idea wouldn't be feasible is A, if it breaks the law, and B, if it's technologically not possible within the time frame. I mean, this is where I would use that Rolodex of management staff to really help with that. They were not ever asked, how is this possible? Or the question is it possible? And so unsurprisingly, the answer was often, yes, it is. And so their buy-in was essential to making sure that the process occurred quickly and efficiently. I acted as a broker of ideas between staff and management. So an example for an example of a quick win, and they're so technical, I was just trying to think of something really broad. So in order to provide service to somebody immediately, their file needs to be active, an active state, but it would take 48 hours for it to download to remain active. So when that was identified to us, we took that back to our IT people who were able to expedite that process so that a client was going to be able to be served almost immediately. So that was an example of a quick win, and that occurred by one staff identifying the problem, taking it to the management staff, and then implementing the solution right away. Yeah, so the prototyping. So with the group, as I mentioned, we did a lot of onboarding. I had to employ a diverse range of creative tactics to get them to think outside the box, to shed a lot of the operational challenges, to critically assess their functions, to trust that the system would listen to new ideas from the front lines and actually make them happen. And sometimes you actually never know what triggers a new way of thinking. So I was just commenting earlier today. So when staff would be given yellow sticky notes, which of course is cheaper, so is what we buy, they would say, I can't think of anything, I have nothing to say. But when I gave them colorful sticky notes, suddenly they had all these ideas. And so just those small triggers, you never knew what worked. So on my end, it was also a lot of trial and error. So the process, for example, of creating a new tool is I would literally sit at my desk like this, thinking, develop something, do some very preliminary user testing of the tool with some caseworkers, and then I tweak it accordingly. So the very process of designing a new process was also very iterative. And it was important to know that the approach itself was being experimented and piloted in this experiment. And I think, honestly, one of my biggest assets was that nobody knew who I was. They had no reason to trust me or distrust me. And because I didn't know the system at all, they were essentially teaching me. I learned everything I know about Ontario Works from the staff. So when they would tell me something, I had no basis to ever to contend against them. It was really the power of listening to them and empathizing in actual, real neutrality that allowed for this working relationship to develop. So when I started, I had all the tensions of the system, historical tensions, kind of thrown at me, and I had to figure out how to manage and leverage that and turn it into productive language, and this occurred throughout the process. Okay. I think I'm clicking accidentally. So the process was generally onboarding with the group, brainstorming and then vetting the ideas for feasibility through the management table, turning that into a very preliminary visual, and I liked clip art, and then from there turning it into a super detailed process map. And all the ideas came from the group itself. My job was to act as their advocate and liaison with management. Because time was scarce, and when I first told someone at the Mars Discovery District about the process, he said that it was crazy that we were doing it under such time constraints, which was essentially 3 months. But the lack of time actually acted as impetus for people to stop thinking operationally and think about actually doing. So because time was scarce, I had to come up with answers within the very same week. So it was conceived as a risk, but it actually was a significant lever in the end. So we had, as I mentioned, about 3 hours to redesign. And remember, we were only meeting for half a day once a week. So we, of course, involved Ontario Works recipients throughout this process because so much of the process is back-end. It's a lot of systems, internal systems, a lot of administrative elements to it. We presented to the over 80 staff. We convened them across the city and engaged them in the process of the front-end elements. So how is it actually going to affect their change? How is the change going to actually affect how they experience Ontario Works? And that's what we want to hear from them as to what do we need to know? What's missing from our process? What do we need to enhance? And they were incredible, and they provided really, really good feedback, and everything that we have was vetted by them, and they continue to be part of our engagement as the project has continued. So staff at work. So one of the great things was that the staff who developed, the frontline staff who developed the models, presented the models to our senior management table. And that perhaps sounds not exciting, but it's super exciting. A lot of them had not really interfaced with senior management in this way before. They were used to being the passive recipients of being told what to do, and here they were telling senior management, hey, this is what we did, this is what we think is best for this division. And what struck me in these forums was how proud they were to be part of the change, and how much they valued the opportunity to learn from the experience. And I want to say also that how proud I am of them. Because the amount of work that they put in was out of this world. A lot of them have proven themselves to be leaders in this division who were able to leverage this opportunity to encourage change across the division. And they're continuing to drive a lot of the change it has. What? Okay, anyway, so testing the prototype. So each office had a small team that developed each individual prototype. So it wasn't the whole office, it was just a small subset of the team. And we tested them for 8 weeks each. And we had a comprehensive evaluation that involved time studies, client and staff satisfaction, surveys, and efficiency loss gain studies. We also had an issue log that was updated regularly that allowed us to keep on top of issues and address them either locally or divisionally. So that's kind of like our 4 process maps. Coincidentally, and I swear it's just coincidence, all the models were complementary to one another instead of contradictory. Okay, yeah, so the other thing we did is we shared our progress with everyone, of course, to build awareness, buy-in, and increase the pool of ideas. So we had an intranet page, we had multiple videos that were put out through the city's new favorite forum, Prezi. And so this helped us keep everyone in the loop and ensure that people knew the process and that we were as transparent as possible. So engaging the process. So there were, of course, 2 simultaneous evaluations. There was the evaluation of the actual process itself, the redesign of the service delivery, but there was also the evaluation of the user-centered design process. As I mentioned, that itself was an experiment. So this is just some small thing that I picked up and tried out. So at 2 offices. So when we started, I asked them to kind of gauge where they fell on the spectrum of excited to skeptical. So if you see, just trying to keep the mic near me. Yeah. So when we started, at both offices, they ran the gamut of people were both excited and skeptical. They very much ranged, but by the end of it, a few months later, almost everyone was on the end of being excited. So yeah. So here at Young and Eglinton, 100% of staff were medium to really excited. Same thing with Hyde Park Parkdale, which I think was a huge win for the actual process. And so this learning, of course, informs change management. Users of the system should be involved from the get-go, right from the design of this research question, not simply as the passive doers. Okay, so what actually is the modernized access model? Now that I've spoken about the process, clipboard again. So at a very high level, because as I mentioned, this can get really technical, really fast, what all these prototypes helped us develop was a massive reduction in time to get clients onto our system. It went from, as I mentioned, from 2 to 12 weeks to 48 hours. We took a massive step forward to help clients to get access to the most critical component, which is the service planning, much faster. And this overall informed a number of changes that I will talk about. Okay, I gotta put that down. Okay, so leveraging technology, because this is a civic tech space, I thought I would have one specifically dedicated to tech. So for all four groups, the technological enhancements related to introducing email, which doesn't sound very exciting, but is very, very exciting. As I mentioned, we relied heavily on fax. So introducing email, allowing people to submit documents electronically, so in our former, existing process, there was this long form called rights and responsibilities. It had to be read out to you, you had to be signed, it's provincially mandated. So what we did is we actually took that form and turned it into a video that's accessible on YouTube. And so now this form that, I don't know, took maybe 20 minutes to read out can now be watched at home, can be watched in the office, can be watched in the meeting. And so that was a huge technological win for us. And then the other thing was the use of automated electronic third-party checks to help mitigate risk more efficiently. And just for an example for how the prototyping approach allowed us to move these changes faster. So as I mentioned, email is a huge, huge win for us. The city, in order to acquire technology, has a quite a complicated gating process that takes months. You have to make multiple business cases. You kind of have to go to this table to make your case. But for prototyping, because we didn't have the luxury of time, what we thought is, instead of going through all the formal procedures, what can we kind of do that allows us to accomplish what we want, which is to get e-submission of documents. So what we did is we created just generic inboxes for each office. It was like Hyde Park, Parkdale, Toronto, USA or something. And that was a way for us to start preliminarily seeing the impacts of these changes before actually dedicating all the large-scale resources to get email as a whole. Of course, unsurprising to anybody, email makes sense, especially for people who are precariously housed. So it's something that we further then adopted. The other case study, and I think this is also super exciting, is about technological change that actually drove policy. So previously, if you were on social assistance and you left and came back onto social assistance within 32 days, you would have to start the process right from the first day. So you would have to go through the entire brand new application process. So we were able to change the 30-day reinstate to become a 6-month reinstate because one of the staff in the prototype groups identified, hey, I work with a lot of young people who go to prison for a few months and then come out and then have to go through the entire application process all over again, which doesn't make sense. They're going to come back to me anyway. I already know who they are. Why put them through the paperwork? We already have the information on the system. So using her feedback, her reflection about her experience working with this population, we tested what impact does it have to be able to extend the reinstate from 30 days to 6 months. Of course, we found it has huge impact. So this was then, but we found that the reason why it was 30 days is because the provincial administrative system called SANS, which you may have read about, there was a technological limitation in SANS itself. So it was interesting because in this instance, it was actually tech limitations that were informing policy changes, that were informing policy, as opposed to policy informing tech. And so by extending the reinstate to 6 months, it informed a policy directive from the province, which now has been rolled out and has impacts for 47 different municipalities in the city. And this all occurred because of one staff reflecting on her experience working with one population. So that's very exciting. Other changes, policy changes, yeah. Reassignment of staff roles. We created a network of change agents, which is really massive, that their frontline staff felt that this was their process, and they're now involved in the rollout of the process throughout the division. It also informed an entirely new way of doing business, both at TESS and at a provincial level. The learning from this process has been shared with the province. And I'll come to these pieces. So evaluation really quickly, there was an overall increase in client satisfaction. There was a 42% increase of clients getting to their service plan discussions right away. There was a reduction of handoffs from 100% to 16%. The average processing time for new applications was reduced by 31%, and for reapplication, the processing time was reduced by 71% during the divisional pilot. Yes?
Sorry, what do you mean by reducing handoffs?
Okay, so in our previous system, when you apply for Ontario Work, suppose you call in. So the first person you talk to, you talk to that person, you tell them your life story, why you need to apply for OW. That person connects you to an in-person staff person, in-office staff person who hears that story again, and then connects you to another person who then becomes your active caseworker. So we were saying we want the active caseworker to be connected to the client right away, and that's what it means by handoff. So the first point of contact should be the person that's going to service you. Does that answer it? Yeah, cool. So overall, there was decreased time and improved satisfaction. I just put this slide in case anyone had a question about our indicators. I can't actually really talk about this one. So implementing the ideas that were tested. So we had 4 prototype teams, plus the application center, with 4 models, with 8 weeks of testing. We took the best features from those models, and we got the staff to tell us what actually works really well, what doesn't work well for the entire division. And using those best features, we came up with one consistent model that was tested at 4 additional offices and the application center, and it was tested for 3 months. And the learnings and the evaluation from that is informing the one divisional model for all 15 offices. And I'm only talking about this part, this here. But the piloting is just wrapping up, and we're just preparing right now for the divisional implementation. Change management, of course, unsurprisingly, engagement makes a huge difference. Understanding the change, it's really important to clearly communicate the purpose, the process, and the intended outcomes to be as transparent as possible. And people don't actually, I don't think they, it was surprising how few people trusted the transparency. But I think as the process developed, they learned actually no one's hiding anything. And they couldn't accuse me of designing anything because I didn't know anything. Everything I knew I got from them. And so readiness and adoption, providing information on the regular, and managing impact and monitoring outcomes is really critical. And this is an ongoing process of dialogue. So the domino effect. So this was the kind of mandate as, okay. This is TESS's mandate as of last year, 2015, 2016. As you see, it's like focus on workforce development, advance the city's workforce development strategy, stewardship of resources, a high-performing organization that achieves its stated outcomes. And this is our, okay. Now it's not. Okay. And that's our, and now this is 2017, 2018 strategic direction. So this experience and user-centered approach kicked off a series of changes internally at TESS. One of the byproducts of expediting the process of how quickly a client gets connected to the service was actually highlighting or bringing to light how we actually do service plans. So we've gotten people onto the system faster, but once they're on the system, how do we treat them? What services are we providing? And that kind of exposed other ways that the system needs improvement. And so this has cleared a path to see additional needs and opportunities which inform this new divisional vision statement. We have a vision statement that you'll notice centers the people we serve and the ways in which we service them. So if you can see, it says our vision statement is, together we encourage purpose and possibility to help people we serve pursue their best lives. And here you see it's centered on the experience and on the user of the system. And a lot of that was through this process that was really only intended to instigate a few changes, but ended up having huge impacts for how the division sees its purpose. So the prototyping approach, though it never intended to, highlighted more acutely the organization and what it means to actually assist residents. It led to a domino effect of all the work that lays ahead. And finally, this is my last slide, we know that we have a lot more work to do, especially when it comes to improving access to service and support. So I work, as mentioned, on poverty reduction, and one of the things we're hoping to do this year is to put out a challenge to the public. The exact scope is still pending, but we want to solicit the best technological solution really to a puzzle that's related to access, information, services and resources for Ontario Works recipients. We have a lot of information, we have a lot of offerings, we just need to figure out how to better empower residents to be able to access that. So I'm interested to hearing from everyone in this room about what does it mean to develop a solution? How can we help? How can we, the city, help develop a solution? How can we help you help us? What do we know? What do we need to know about what it takes for you to work with government, and what would make you excited to partner with us? I'll be at one of the tables, and if you want to get in touch with me, that's my email. And if you want to get in touch with the service delivery model renewal team, they're actually here, or you can email them. Thank you.